And we are back. So we ran into a weird bug of some sort that, for whatever reason, apparently prevents the configuration edit dialog from being shown once the auto start changes have been saved to disk. Um, After the stream, I will go through the code and try and see if I can work out exactly what's going on. Um, it could very well become a lengthy trial and error to try and figure out exactly what's up with this weird bug. It's probably something that's been in there for a while that I just haven't run into yet. So I'll do some proper debugging and try and see if I can work out exactly what's going on, and then make sure that I put in some comments to describe exactly what the bug was and what the fix was as part of the source code before I upload it to GitHub. Um, okay, so at least we know the settings can be saved and correctly shown, so that part is fine. I just need to work out that weird bug. I'll put in a note here. To do, figure out why this dialog sometimes doesn't show after changes to settings have been saved. So I'll figure that out, and then I'll make sure to put proper descriptions in the comments in the code so we can see exactly what went wrong and what kind of fixes were needed to kill the bug. Okay, um, now we still have a couple of things that we kind of need to work on to get all the schedule stuff properly working and doing backups and such. And there are a few more things that I would like to implement as part of this server launcher. I'll go over them shortly, quickly. Um, we need to build some kind of backup handling. For that, I'm going to build a backup manager that basically works similar to how the schedule manager works. It just sits in the background waiting for a task to do. We don't really need to have any kind of progress bar showing us how far through the backup process we are. We basically just need to be informed by means of the UI that it's currently down and doing a backup. For that purpose, I've prepared a few extra icons. One that basically shows that it's shutting down for a restart. I've got sort of a circular arrow icon for that. And I've also found a nice zip icon that I can put on there when it's shutting down for backup. So we'll simply just update the UI and put the zip icon on there while the backup is running. And when the backup is done, it'll start up again. So that'll take care of the UI feedback. Basically, for the most part, this should eventually just be a startup and forget application, kind of. So the instance where we potentially would want a progress bar shown in terms of how far through the backup process it's gotten, well, chances are we won't ever need it. So we'll leave that part out and basically just let it do its thing in the background. Um, like I said, for that purpose, I'll build a backup manager, which we will start on shortly. And past that, we need to tie in the events that the schedule manager trigger in terms of providing us some feedback with what kind of schedule actually triggered. So we've got the backup and we have the restart. These two events trigger from the schedule manager whenever that particular scheduled time occurs for this particular server instance. And from here we need to do the actual shutdown by means of sending the server a stop command, waiting for it to finish shutting down, and then restart it for a restart event. And for the backup events, we need to insert, hey, go do a backup of this, and when the backup is done, we'll need to restart it. So we need to tie in some code with these two events. For that, we kind of need to build the backup manager. I'll construct the backup manager to let us queue up backups, and it will then process those backups one at a time. And whenever it is done doing the actual backup itself, the backup manager will raise an event that says, hey, I'm done doing this backup for this server instance, which can then tell us, oh, now it's time to go through and restart the server. For the actual shutdown start up again, the regular restart thing, we'll have to do the handling a little bit differently since we won't have a specific event that tells us now we can restart. But we'll get all that stuff done as well. On top of that, I would like to, down the line, to be able to add in, say, chat warnings that the server launcher will execute on the Minecraft server, basically informing any online players that we are shutting down for, say, daily maintenance in 10 minutes, fire the warning again 5 minutes later, so 5 minutes before, do it 1 minute before, 30 seconds before, I don't know, 15 seconds before, do a countdown, and then shut down the server and do whatever needs to be done. But doing this kind of message stuff in chat in Minecraft kind of involves that we have to build up the chat messages in a specific format. And going through building up such chat messages is a somewhat lengthy process to do. Especially if we want to have the ability to customize those messages. Now, I think it would be neat if we had the ability to say, for example, if it's running a, say, German community, that it could put German texts in the chat warning players that we're about to shut down. Rather than us just hardwiring a specific English text that basically just says, hey, we're shutting down in a minute. So for those, I think it would be neat if we could fully customize those warning messages. So we'll have to build something that can let us set them up, possibly also let us configure whether those warning messages should be there, how much time before the either backup or restart takes place. So we can better customize that particular setup for this particular server instance. That's something that I want to put in there. But I'm kind of thinking that doing that part of it may take maybe one or two full sessions, depending how much trouble it causes for us. But it's one of those would be nice to have things. At the moment, it's not a hugely important thing except to keep the players happy. And anyone that has ever run a game server of some kind knows that it's vitally important to keep the community happy. So we'll put those in there. I'll go through what kind of requirements the Minecraft server poses to us in terms of getting those messages out in chat to every player that's online. Um, and from there, we'll go through some kind of customization options so we can put it in there. Um, in doing so, there is a second place where we could potentially do a similar customization, which would be part of the MOTD message. See, the message of the day that is stored and configured in the server properties file for the Minecraft server actually supports that we can put in 2 lines of text as well as things like colors. But they have to be written in a very particular format for both the server and the game client to actually accept it. And that format is highly different from the format that the game chat expects. So in writing some kind of customization for these, we may want to see if we can come up with a format that can be easily typed into a message box like this, or sorry, a text box like this, but at the same time also support both of these two kinds of formatting that the server expects for the MOTD versus the game chat expects to display proper text in chat. Of course, we could just leave these as regular white texts as it does by default, but I think it would be more neat if we could do colors and better formatted to properly show, say, the restart warnings and such. And it would be nice if we could equally customize the message of the day for the server so that anyone that wants to connect to it gets a better description or a more vibrant description of the server they're connecting to. All of that customization is for future episodes. For now, we still have a few technical issues to take care of, hooking into the schedule events and building a backup manager. Since we are slowly moving towards the end of this project, I'm kind of yes, I do have GitHub. If you look in the panels just below the stream, there are direct links to both projects that I've got hosted on GitHub that I've done on stream. Where was I? Yes. I have a couple of ideas for the next project or upcoming projects, but I would also like to throw the towel in, I guess, and leave the chat open for project suggestions. If there's a particular project or a particular thing that you would like to see as a stream project, then I'm definitely open to suggestions, and I will definitely take all of them to heart and We'll see if we can figure out what to do next. Um, um, the initial idea I had was to start up a project of basically building an old school mod game server. Uh, Mod games were the precursors to all of the MMORPGs that we know today, like um, World of Warcraft and Runes of Magic and so on and so forth. Before they started making an appearance, we had kind of hidden communities that played on massive multiplayer online role-playing games, though they were all based on text descriptions. But they existed, and they actually date back very far, even as far back as before the graphical internet was born. So they've been around for a very long time. Given all the modern graphics that we now have, they've kind of slowly died a silent death, and a lot of them, they are maybe visited by one or two people a week these days. So it is a dying breed of game. However, what makes a project like that interesting is that we kind of get to see how to build, say, world handling. We get to see how individual network connections are handled for players connecting to the game and moving around in the game. We get to see how we can implement some kind of communication system, like, for example, doing emote-based chat communication as part of the gaming interface. We get to see how um, simple things like item handling is done, like, for example, being able to pick up an item that's sitting on the ground, or interacting with a non-player character, and all of it without basically having any specific requirements of the hardware that the player is basically no hardware requirements for the game client that connects, except you need a telnet client. Um, how do I relate to cheaters and reversing source code in such games? You mean on mods? Um, for a mod, it is basically the most insecure way of building a game when compared to what kind of security features are in place for modern games. Um, um, because the entire gaming interface is based on um, a simple text TCP connection with no kind of encryption, which means anybody can effectively sniff the connection and very easily uh, basically steal whatever's being sent back and forth. As an example of building the core mechanics for an RPG, a project like this is, in my opinion, a good way to go about learning how to do stuff like this. All of the security layers, like securing player accounts and encrypting data connections back and forth, all that stuff is stuff that is more suited for, say, a more modern game than a mod would be. But in terms of learning how to implement the basics for getting something like that running, I think a mod project would be far more revealing to do than trying to build something modern up with network connection encryptions and account encryptions and messing about with some kind of 3D engine or 2D engine, which would just cause a lot of extra noise that doesn't really deal with the core mechanics of building such an RPG. So to keep the noise level at a minimum, I think a mod project would be more suitable for teaching basically how to implement the the most simple aspects of building a game world, building some means for players to be able to move around in that game world, and from there build some kind of interaction features, like, for example, a vending machine or a chest, for example, building up stuff that deals with items and inventories and respawning of stuff. All those mechanics are the ones that are interesting to learn and work out, whereas all of the securing of the actual connection and players and cheaters and such, that's more suited for an actual game implementation. Um, which of course is something that adds in a whole new dimension of extra stuff that has to be done. But I often get a lot of questions about how to implement certain features as sort of a foundation to build a game, and if I can teach at least some of the principles of how some types of games are implemented, to give an idea of which direction to go with the code and how to actually get the code working, I think going with a mod project would probably be the interesting way to go, because all of the noise is gone. Of course, it would be easy to log on to the game server and go cheat if you really wanted to. Um, but since it's just a text game, most people will not even bother, to be honest. In all the years that I've been part of mod communities, I think I've only experienced one, maybe two episodes of people attempting to cheat the game server by effectively sending it commands too fast, um, to see if they could break the connection or have it duplicate items or have it duplicate gold, for that matter. And as long as we are effectively sitting with all the power in terms of controlling what's going on, it would be fairly straightforward to implement some kind of delay system on the server that prevents the user from effectively moving too fast, for example. Um, the mod game server has full control over what happens, and you won't be able to do anything client side to try and cheat the server unless the server actually allows for it. So mods are actually fairly strong in terms of preventing cheating, um, because every little bit of handling is done server side and always server side. It doesn't rely on the more modern server client cheating that goes on in terms of how to, for example, synchronize movement between players, as is done in modern games, to reduce the payloads being sent back and forth. In a text-based environment, you don't need to synchronize that kind of information. You basically just need to synchronize some kind of event that takes place. Say, for example, a player entering a room that effectively tells or that effectively gets the server to throw a text description to the clients that are in this particular room, that player 4 has entered this particular room right now. So the server is in full control, and it's actually pretty difficult to cheat a mod server into doing something it's not supposed to. Of course, you can always see if you can cheat your way to, say, get immortal rank, so you can go and modify the world. But for the most part, most mod servers, even the very old ones, have implemented extra features that effectively allow immortal players to connect to the game server on a different port, as well as do some kind of two-step authentication through other means to verify that they are actually that particular person. So the only case where say an immortal's account could be compromised is by means of, say, a keylogger. And um, that basically exposes any player account on any gaming platform. So that's something that you, as say, a game author, you can't prevent that from happening. That's up to the individual using the game to stay clear of. Um, Reverse engineering source codes for mods, basically there's no need to, because most of the original mod cores are actually downloadable off the web. There are plenty of places where you can go and download a complete mod core, compile it, and run it. No point in doing that. Waste of time trying to reverse engineer the source code. Um, since I'm doing these projects fully open source for the most part, I wouldn't have any problems with people running off with whatever code is written while doing these streams, hence why I've got them on GitHub for anyone to grab. So if I was doing something that I intended to make a profit off, I would first and foremost not do it on stream, and secondly, I wouldn't ever publish it on any kind of Git repository that's publicly available, and I definitely wouldn't put it on our cloud storage anywhere. So that's just my paranoia, I guess. um, well, let's put it this way. Any kind of socket connections, TCP connections, effectively it does not matter what language was used to build the original network communication. Because once you establish a TCP connection somewhere, whatever goes across that TCP connection is up to the declared protocol. And a protocol is basically a technical document that describes exactly what kind of data goes back and forth. And as long as you are able to get your hands on a specific protocol, you can write a program in any language that supports TCP connections and the discrete data types, and effectively build an application that can correctly communicate across that TCP connection to whatever's on the other end. It's in effect only a matter of figuring out what the protocol contains. On modern systems where things like encryption is more and more being used more and more, sorry, the first difficulty would be to try and attack the encryption to see if you can figure out exactly how it's encrypted. If you can get past that, then you need to decode the protocol, and then you can write something that can effectively replicate it. Things like if you grab Counter-Strike, for example, there are tons of different aim bots and whatnot that you can install on your computer to help you basically win the game faster and more efficiently. Most of what these applications do is that they act as a proxy. for the game client. So the game client connects to the bot, and the bot then connects to the game server. And the bot itself then sniffs what's going on the network connection and effectively inserts more precise aiming data that is being sent to the server to replace what your mouse is actually doing. And thereby tells the server, oh, I am aiming exactly at this guy's head, and then you pull the trigger by just clicking, and it instantly headshots that opposing player. Um, that is easily done with something like Counter-Strike because overall the protection level that was implemented on the network connections back then didn't really exist. So most of the data is basically just being sent raw. It's unencrypted, and as long as you have raw unencrypted data on a network connection, you can easily sniff the data and work out the protocol and then insert changes to said data packets as they go from the client to the server, and thereby inserting a cheat that allows the player to cheat his way to winning. On a text-based mod setup, text adventure, who would want to cheat? And if so, what kind of cheating would you like to implement to I don't know, further your character or earn XP and so on and so forth. There are only so few things that you can, in reality, cheat with on a text-based adventure game, because the game core itself effectively has built-in checks and balances to ensure that um, the game progresses the way it's supposed to. Like, for example, in a combat situation, you as the player, you have absolutely zero mechanics in terms of how you can interact with the combat situation itself. The server basically executes both sides of the battle. It handles the enemy that you're fighting as well as you, and effectively only reports back what happened. So if in a combat round you swing your battle axe and the dice determine that you actually hit your enemy, then the server will tell you you hit the enemy causing X amount of damage. Then it's the enemy's turn. He swings his sword and misses, and then the server tells you in text, your enemy swung his sword and he missed you. And that could be because of some kind of lucky roll or whatever. But since your game client is basically nothing more than a dumb text terminal, and it doesn't have any kind of combat mechanics built into it whatsoever, there's really no way of actually cheating the server into believing that, oh, you've annihilated your enemy in one hit. You can't cheat it because all that handling takes care on the server itself, not as part of the game client, like, for example, in Counter-Strike. So for such a project, cheaters are not really a huge worry. Of course, the instant where um, you go and build, say, a game client like the one for World of Warcraft, where the client itself has a lot of control over what's going on, um, and synchronizes that control with the server. That opens up a whole new dimension of cheating and manipulating what's going on, reverse engineering the source code, and so on. And people do that. So it's a matter of weighing the cost benefit, I guess, to figure out whether you want to invest a huge amount of resources into preventing cheating, or whether you'll find it, say, an acceptable loss as part of the profit making in running the game. But yeah. Okay. As yeah. I'm of course fully open to doing some other kind of project at the moment. I've got the idea of doing the mod game server as the next project. If anybody has other suggestions, please feel free to post them in the chat. I'll see if I can get something up fairly soonish, TM, where suggestions can be submitted, and we can do some voting and stuff for them to see what we'll do as the next project. I've been working on a sort of media hub where I'm going to put the videos from the stream up. I'm going to put project descriptions, and the different to-do lists for every session. All that stuff is going up there, including links to GitHub repositories and whatnot. And I'm also going to put an actual suggestion box up there where you'll be able to suggest projects that we can do on stream. And then I'll make sure to go through them and see what kind of projects come in. I'll put a couple of my own suggestions up there as well. But at least then we can keep sort of an open mind in terms of what to do, what kind of project we want to do next on the stream. Yeah, that's basically the reason I kind of chose that project, even though, and I do stress this, mod games are a dying breed. Not a lot of people actually do play mods anymore. But to learn all the um, uh, core stuff underneath the hood, it's actually a very decent um, project to do because there are so many aspects of building up something like that. I have actually looked at the Twitch suggestion extension. I wasn't quite sure whether it could do what I needed it to do, but I'll go through it this weekend and see if I can get it working in the way I want it to work, and then possibly put it on my Twitch page. Oh, Herr Trust, good to see you again, my friend. What is with an interface for GitHub for you that you can easily upload and describe things? I'm currently working on adding a Twitch bot for the chat. Hopefully I'll have that done by Wednesday. And for the media hub that I have planned and that I'm working on is actually on my one of my domains. So I'll build a fully customized web setup for referencing all the videos that I've put on YouTube, putting up a proper playlist for each individual project, and also put up some proper descriptions of the projects, what the goals are, and basically do a kind of how should I put this, simplistic project management system. Yeah, yeah, I know. um, I could maybe move the stream time a bit, but it'll kind of conflict with all the other real life stuff that goes on. So I kind of had to settle on some uh, time. Um, Anyways, the Media Hub will try. The plan is to have the Media Hub basically contain the projects and along with each individual project. I'll attach, say, all of the stream videos, the project source code. I'll see if I can do generational individual download packages for each session once I have that up and running. So you can go through each individual stream day and effectively grab the source code from that stream day and then go through the code there and compare it to what's happened at the following stream day to see what kind of changes were made and such. That's some of the stuff that I'm working on for the Media Hub. Um, so you can get better information about what the projects are, what the goals are, how far through the process we are. I'll do a sort of checklist thing that can be set up for each stream project. So we can keep track of how far we've moved through constructing this particular project. As new features show up or are suggested, I might add in a separate suggestion box for a stream project where features could be suggested or requested, and that we can then add in as part of the project development as we move forward. So that'll hopefully get some better information and a higher level of information and interaction out. So it's something that I'm working on. And I'm hoping I'll be able to publish it sometime soon. And the typical soon TM, of course. Everything's relative. But yeah, like I said, definitely don't be shy, don't hold back. If you have some kind of project you'd like to suggest we do on stream, please don't hold back. If you feel that the projects we're doing are too advanced or too simple, please let me know too. If someone would like a this is C sharp starting up from the scratch, blah blah, then we can do a complete beginners do a couple of complete beginners streams as well. I don't mind. A Twitch chatbot. I was actually looking into how the Twitch chatbots work and found out that the Twitch chat is actually based on basically a customized IRC server. And I've done a bunch of IRC stuff in the past, so I'm fairly sure that it's something that we could potentially do. The major difference between how IRC works and how the Twitch chat works is how you authenticate your chat client. That's done a little different on the Twitch chat than it is on regular IRC, but it's yes, it is. But yeah, we could do a Twitch chatbot at some point. No doubt about that. It should be fairly straightforward doing it. Once you've got a network connection established, it's basically just a bunch of text parsing and keeping track of how often you send messages to the server, because Twitch has pretty high and strict requirements in terms of throttling communication. So each client is only allowed to send a certain amount of messages per minute, And if we don't comply with those requirements, we could end up with a temporary ban for, say, a day or a couple of days. If we continuously violate those restrictions, the application will end up becoming permanently banned. That's part of their requirements. So um, it's something that we would need to keep track of. Having said that, there are a couple of existing libraries um, that are available on GitHub that more or less fully implements a Twitch interface, not only for the chat, but also for things like keeping track of follow events and raids and all the other stuff that goes on through Twitch. Those are part of those libraries, and they are publicly available on GitHub, so you can fetch the libraries and implement it as part of your project. Um, Something that others have written, free of charge, all of them, as far as I know. A little bit of Googling. I believe there's a one called Twitch Sharp or something like that. I can't remember. But there are projects out there already with full source code for communicating with Twitch chat and hooking into the different events and such. But I will definitely put it on my list. Um, if I can find a pen that actually works. This one didn't. Let's see. Try this one. There we go. Um, and Twitch chatbot. In terms of Twitch bots, of course, it could be fun to implement one. You can grab the libraries, as I mentioned, or you could, if you need it, for example, grab the Streamlabs chatbots, which is free of charge. If you give me a second, I'll see if I can find the URL for it. I have it in here somewhere. That would be this one. Let's get this one again. There we go. There you go. Fully integrated chatbot that can communicate with both Twitch and Discord, and has a ton of different features. So I guess it's just a matter of what you want the bot to do. That's actually the bot that I might end up going with. It seems fairly comprehensive in terms of what I need it to do. So that's at least one option. In any case, any other suggestions? Don't hold back. We'll put them all on a list and then figure out which one to do. And eventually, I guess we could do all of them. But we'll see where it leads. I'm not particularly locked on any particular specific project. The only thing that I will say up front is that I will most likely not go into say any Unity or OpenGL or DirectX projects as such, because I don't feel strong enough in that kind of coding to actually do it on a stream. So I'll gladly do pretty much anything else. But those specific areas, I don't have as much experience, and um, it doesn't do much good if everyone basically sits here going, what the heck does that mean? Including myself. So if I can't explain it and what it does, then I'd prefer not doing it. I hope you don't mind. Um, for example, all of the Unity stuff, you can get the Unity graphics engine for free, and their community has overwhelmingly huge amounts of documentation and tutorials and videos and stuff that helps people get started with the Unity graphics engine. I'd much more prefer to basically redirect people there and get a hold of the people over there that are highly experienced working with that graphics engine. Um, but there are tons of other things that we can definitely do. So I think doing a chatbot of some kind, either Twitch or Discord or both. We can do that. See if we can work out how the protocol works and how to build up something that can actually talk to the chat server, um, trigger on events, and so on. Um, and then, of course, a planner for projects. Um, hmm. Well, we can certainly try, but I'll say this right away. That is actually something that is a bit difficult doing if you want the planner to do part of the planning for you. Apart from that, um, the rest of it would potentially just be a kind of how should I put this, to-do system on steroids. Um, Basically, anybody that has ever worked with code at some point or another will have seen something like, say, for example, an issue tracker. Um, GitHub comes with a built-in simplistic issue tracker where people can submit some kind of bug description or say a request for feature or whatever. Um, that can then be used as part of a planning process for, say, cleaning up bugs in a project, and effectively turns those issues into a to-do list. So for the most part, building up a project planning system would kind of be a mix between say a tasks slash to-do system coupled with an issue tracker. Um, yes. Um, Personally, I think it would be beneficial to build such a project as a web setup, simply because web interfaces make it far easier for multiple people to collaborate on the same project, because all they would need to do is to basically have an account, and then that account grants access to going through the project details, and it would then be accessible on any platform. Um, if we choose to build that as an application, then you need to have that application on the computer you're working with at the moment, to be able to access the project details. Whereas on a web setup, you could do it from your smartphone if you needed to. So project handling system, yeah, definitely. We could potentially um, build one of those, a web-based setup. Note that down. Um, Project management. system. Got a couple of ideas on how we can do that to try and keep it somewhat simple, but at the same time have sufficient power in the system to let us all keep track of it. I'm kind of building a kind of stripped down version of such a system on the Media Hub, since I'm implementing options to properly describe the project, put up some kind of goal listing, add in to-dos for today's stream, and giving myself the option to basically check mark them when they're done. At some point we could do a web project like that, and then effectively only have the handling system for that, and not all the other stuff that I'm also putting on here. That would be for everybody else to attach to the project management system any way you see fit. So we can definitely do that. I've noted it as a possible project for the future. Any other projects? I mean, some things are more suited for web setups because of the basically connectivity required for it, while others are better suited for applications as such. Um, Something like a project handling system, I personally find more useful as a web project or a web application, simply because it allows for greater connectivity than an application would do, for example. Um, okay, let's see. Yeah. If something else springs to mind, please don't hold back. I will make sure that these suggestions go on the Media Hub as well, so we can um, keep track of whatever projects have been suggested and eventually go through them in time. I'll just put in who mentioned them. Um, so we can keep track of who suggested them and give proper credit. Let's see. Dum 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 dum. Ooh, both of these were my good friend Herr Trust and Sir Pinwheel agreed on the mud thing. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it, and I'll make sure you get credited. There we go. Okay. Let's see if we can get a backup manager built. All right, cool. We'll definitely look into that. I'll see which one we'll do. I don't know. We'll see. In any case, they're all written down. I'm kind of um, I'm kind of leaning towards doing the project handling system as the next stream project, just to basically give us a platform to interact on projects showcase some of the stuff that I've been doing on the Media Hub, but then split out the actual project handling stuff by it on its own. Um, and come to think of it, there are actually a number of fairly decent systems available that you can get for free. Open source projects or open source systems that you can basically download off the web somewhere and then install on a web server, and you're basically instantly up and running. Um, so there are a lot of such systems, but of course that doesn't exactly uh, describe or explain how to go about building them. Um, and that could easily become more interesting than just going out and getting one. Um, but yeah, we'll see which one we'll do next. Okay, let's see. We kind of need to get the backup manager built, at least at some point. So might as well do that now. Um, and then we'll figure out how to tie in the events from the schedule manager. Uh, it's definitely something that we need to do at some point, but I'm kind of leaning towards doing them off stream, simply because it could easily involve sitting there and waiting for a couple of minutes for the event to trigger properly. Um, and that can pretty quickly get boring. Oh, we're just gonna wait 5 minutes for this thing to trigger. Dead stream for 5 minutes, nothing happens. Oh, it triggered, something crashed. Damn it. Fix it. Try again. So yeah, no. I think I'll do those off stream to check that they're working the way they are supposed to, and then go through the code changes on stream and describe exactly what went down while implementing the code, so we can go through it and learn from the experience. So let's see if we can get a backup manager built. So for the backup manager, we need to implement some way of packing up all the files. um, let's just call this backup manager, that's fine. I'll get rid of this so we can potentially reuse it. There we go. Before we write any code here, let's grab this one quick. No, not this one, we'll go here. Um, the vanilla. So if we take a quick look at the server properties in its raw form, um, it has a entry that specifies basically the folder that contains the entire game world. It's called level name, and here it points to a folder called world. So if we take a look at the world folder, that would be the stuff that we need to zip up. So all of the subfolders and files and stuff that are in here need to go into some kind of archive. Now, for these particular server instances that I'm running locally here, those worlds are not particularly big, because they haven't been massively explored by hundreds and hundreds of different players. So the size is fairly small. However, if we were to, say, run a multi-dimension open community where any player can join in and play and visit any of the available extra dimensions that might be added to the game, then the size of this world folder could very easily become fairly big. In terms of compressing stuff into a zip file, there is an upper limitation to how big a single zip file can become. And that limitation is due to how file references are stored in the file format for the zip file, and how big those numbers can become. Basically, the upper limit for a zip file is something like 4 gigabytes at most, so we can't go past that size. Well, have fun, have trust. It was great to see you. Um, for our purposes here, the game world isn't particularly big. As you can see, it's 111 megabytes, so that's fairly small. So here we wouldn't hit that limit. The only reason I'm mentioning this is because we need to be aware that such an upper limit actually exists, in case we were running something bigger. But for these purposes, it should suffice. Let's see how big the world is here. Yeah, 2 megabytes, so not particularly big either. In any case, let's crack on with some code for the backup manager. Now, since we don't know exactly how long it's going to take to zip up that world folder, we definitely want to have some kind of reporting system that can tell us when we are done doing the backup for this particular server instance. So let's get a constructor on here, just because we need it. And sorry, this needs public. Nice spelling there, dude. There we go. All right, so if we take a page from the schedule manager, it basically allows us to add in a bunch of schedules, which are then processed by means of a separate thread that loops through all of the defined schedules and then triggers an event as needed. So in a similar fashion, we will build up a separate thread for the backup manager and leave it running in the background. And then whenever we schedule an actual backup, thank you very much for the follow, Pink Bubble Interactive. Appreciate it. Whenever we add a backup event, I guess, to the backup manager, it'll start processing whatever events might be in, whatever backups might be in the list currently, and then have it raise an event when it's done. So why would we want to put it in a separate thread? Well, if we Google C# zip files, we will get some examples of how to go about compressing a folder of files with all the junk that's in there and stuff it into a zip. And part of that process is that it basically blocks until that process is done. So if we were to do that as part of our main form thread, that basically means that the entire UI is blocked until the archiving process is done. And we don't want to do that because we've got tons of other things going on. We've got monitoring of each individual Minecraft server instance, what's going on in the console, players joining, players leaving. We've got the schedule manager keeping track of time versus when it needs to restart, and there are tons of things going on. So we will simply just build a separate thread for the backup manager. that then deals with processing whatever queued up backups might be in the list. So whenever it's done with one, it'll raise an event and then check the list of queued up projects from there and process the next one if, for example, two backups occur at the same time, more or less. Um, so um, let's see if we can get some of this stuff done. Okay, so what do we need in terms of handling an actual backup? Well, we kind of need to know which folder to compress, and we need to know where to put the zip file, and we probably also need to know which server instance started this backup. So we can correctly report back when this particular backup has completed. Um, we could even add in another event that triggers just before the backup starts. So we could have a backup starting, backup completed events, and then hook into those. But regardless how we choose to do this, the I'm done event definitely needs to report which server instance this particular backup was done for. So that's one thing to keep in mind. All right, let's get some events declared here. Get some events in here. And we will call the first one, let's call this backup completed. We know that we need this one, so we'll stuff that in here, event handler. And we know that we have to report back which server instance this was, so we'll have to report the server host ID back. Then do the actual event. There we go, and an in, internal method so we can actually raise the event. Server host ID. There we go. Then invoke it and pass the host ID. There we go. All right. So that takes care of one event. In case we want to keep track of when the backup started, say for example if we wanted to output that to a log somewhere, or we wanted to update the main UI with say the zip icon, which is something that we know that we want to do at some point, then it would be beneficial if we could somehow signal that we are now starting that backup process. So we'll add in another event for that. Backup starting. There we go. And then we shall event handler. This of course also has to report which server instance this is for. And the event itself. There we go. And then a way to raise the event, server host ID, like so, and we'll invoke it and pass the ID. Nice. All right, so we also need to come up with a way to actually store the backup references, the backup information, so that we can correctly find the world folder, as well as all the files inside, plus where we need to store them, like for example in the backups folder. We should probably also try and figure out a way to name these things, so we know what this particular backup is for. And We also need to implement some kind of queue system so we can queue up backups and do multiple backups back to back, basically. So there are a couple of things that we definitely need to look into. Let's start by figuring out how we are going to store each individual backup instruction. We know that we need to accept a path to where the backup should take place. We need a path to where we want the zip file stored, and we also need the server host ID that this backup is associated with. So we can properly report back and synchronize with all the other setups. Just for the sake of keeping things simple, we'll do an internal structure that would be backup entry. We need the server host ID so we can report back. We need the server path, and we also need the backup path. There we go. Nothing too hugely complex about that. Server host ID, string server path, and finally the backup path. Now, why am I doing this? Well, I'm going to make use of the queue object to store these backup entries, because then I can the queue object works similar to a list, except you have options where you can add an entry to the end of the queue and then dequeue the first available entry, which basically returns the first entry and then removes it from the queue. So it's a very nice collection to build up queue management stuff, because you can do it very easily with it. We're going to use that for our purposes. That will be this one equals the question mark. Yeah, that would be the one passed. Then we need to store the server path. I'll trim that just in case. Whoops. And we need to store the backup path. So we'll grab this one, trim it just in case. There we go. Okay, so this takes care of storing exactly the data we need. We will have to assume that the main form correctly passes both the server path, the backup path, as well as the server host ID. So even though assumption is the mother of all screw-ups, in this case we will assume that they are correct. When we do the actual backup, we will do some proper file and folder checking, just to make sure that we actually have valid destinations and that we're not overriding an existing backup. But all of that stuff comes later. For now, we will keep this in here. So we'll do a private queue of backup entry type, and we'll do the backup queue equals new queue of this. There we go. We know that we probably need at least one public method, so we'll do a region for that. Methods, like so. Yeah, we'll just do an add method, I guess. We don't really need much else, so we'll do public void add, and have to specify the server host ID, must specify the path to the server, and we should probably rename this to the server world instead, or server level name. Yeah, we should call it server level name. do that because then it better describes what exactly we'll call it server level path instead. Yeah, that's better. Server level path and level path and level path. There we go. That is a little more descriptive. So there, and we'll add in the backup path, like so. And since this is going to be a threaded setup, we definitely need to do some cross-thread synchronization. So we might as well just lock it to the backup queue right away. And then we will simply backup queue in queue a new instance of backup entry, passing the server host ID, the server level path, and the backup path, like so. There we go. Queue up this backup. So enqueue basically adds whatever's passed to the end of the queue. And there is a similar dequeue function that fetches the first available entry, meaning the oldest one, basically, and then removes it from the list. So it's basically just a regular list, but with some extra methods on it to make queue handling a little easier. All right, so we should probably document this. Let's see, add another, a new backup request to the backup queue. There we go, the unique Minecraft server host ID reference for the instance that needs a backup. There we go. The full path to the Minecraft servers level folder. There we go. And the full path to where the backup files should be stored. There we go. All right. Descriptions, descriptions, descriptions. All right, so let's see if we can get some thread stuff done. And we will add all of the actual backup stuff afterwards. So let's see the backup monitoring. So we know that we are going to need a thread, so we'll grab a thread in there. That would be the backup thread. We'll set that to null to begin with, so we can properly set it up afterwards. We also know that we are going to need a method to host the thread, so we'll add that in. Call that backup monitor. There we go, and make it right away so we don't forget. And we also need a method to start it up. Start backup monitor. There we go. And we should probably also do some kind of shutdown, but we'll most likely just do that through the same means as we did in the schedule manager. Now the way we did it in here is that we implemented dispose and then basically used the disposal of the schedule manager to terminate the monitoring thread and destroy all the stuff that was used. So we'll do something similar here. And to do so, we shall need to implement iDisposable. And for that, we might as well grab the entire dispose pattern so we can customize it. And we'll get that moved down here, and then get rid of all this junk that Microsoft throws in here. Disposal. And do this instead. I don't like their disposed value. That's just me. To do. Terminate the backup monitoring thread, and whatever else needs to be destroyed here. To do dispose of whatever else, and we'll get rid of this one, and there we go. Okay, so we know that we, as part of the constructor, need to fire up the monitoring thread, and since we already did the method for it, except for some reason an E slipped in there, I'll simply call this one whenever it's instantiated. There we go. And down here we will then kill the running flag that we will implement just like we did in the schedule manager. So up here we will need to declare a volatile running and set that to false. So as part of the startup process, let's go and have a look at how we did it here. As you can see, we simply created the thread, started it, waited for it to become alive, and then that's it. As part of the very first thing we do in the schedule manager's monitoring method is that we set the running flag to true. And we will do exactly the same thing here. So just to keep track of this, we'll do that right away so we don't forget. And in the start backup monitor method, we will then create the thread and fire it up. So I believe we called this one, where is it, backup thread. So backup thread equals new thread and new thread start, and point to the backup monitor. There we go. And then we'll attempt to start it. And we will wait for the backup thread to become alive. And we'll just wait for 5 milliseconds. That should be enough. There we go. This takes care of starting up the thread, waiting for it to be stabilized and alive, and that then basically does the trick for it. Whenever execution of this particular method ends and you exit the method, the thread is automatically shut down. Next up, we need to keep this method running for as long as we need to. I'm pretty sure that oh yeah, doesn't make much sense Fuck you too. Anyway, um, in here we then need to add in stuff like check the queue to see if we need to do another backup. Um, if a backup is done, then remove the entry from the queue, of course. There we go. And let's see if we can do something about this really interesting. Da, 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 whatever. Um, None of the above. Whatever. Yeah, forget it. This one, let's see if we can just, boom. There we go. Bye bye. What a jerk. Anyway, and we should probably also see about hanging out for a few milliseconds between each check. Of course, as part of this, we also kind of need to, let's see, we need to set this to false just in case. Whenever we do the queue check, we should make sure that we lock on the backup queue, so we prevent any changes to the queue as long as we are messing with the contents of it. We already added the ability to add backup requests to the queue, so here we will see if there's actually something in it. Since we don't really want to, how should I put this, block against more additions to the queue while a backup is going on, we will basically check the queue for contents and only handle it whenever there actually is an entry, and then step out of the thread lock and then handle the actual backup. By doing it this way, we still leave the queue open for new additions while a specific backup is being performed. That's simply just to make sure that we can still accept new backup requests. Okay. For the sake of grabbing a backup entry, we will do a, let's see, we'll add a local variable here, which would be backup entry, and we'll do, yeah, we'll just do entry, that's fine, and grab a new one. And this one we will force to have a server host ID of -1, meaning it's unreferenced and doesn't exist. And this leaves us with basically a dead backup entry. Here we then need to see if the queue has entries. The count property will tell you how many items are in the queue. So if the counter is greater than 0, then we will simply just grab that entry, backup queue.dequeue, and there we go. So in case there is one entry available, we will dequeue that entry from the queue, stuff it in our local entry variable, and that basically takes care of the actual queue handling. Next step, we need to figure out whether we actually have a potentially viable backup entry that needs to be handled. So we will simply do a check that determines whether the server host ID is greater than -1. If that is the case, then we potentially have a backup to do. So that's where we will be doing it. And by doing the check outside the thread lock, we can block all we want, but still allow the other thread to add new backup entries to the end of the queue for later processing. Thereby we prevent blocking or stalling the application, and still letting the backup manager perform all the queued up backups in the order they were added. So this should take care of that. The one thing missing here is the actual backup process itself. This we already did. Let's put this in. Okay, we can do this. Are there any entries in the queue? Yes, grab the first one. Did we get a backup request from the queue? So, yep, let's get this done. So in order to do this, we will create another method or a couple of other methods that will handle all this backup stuff for us. So one of the ways to go through this, or rather the approach that we're going to take, is to verify that the server level path is correct and that there are actually files and folders in there. If that's correct, then we will see if the backup path exists. If it doesn't, we will try to make it, create the path, create the folder. And if the creation or the path exists, the creation of the backup path was successful, or the path already exists, then we will see about creating some kind of file name that matches, say, the date and the timestamp, and then go through the process of actually compressing the level folder. All right. The reason we want to go through checking the paths and such is to make sure that we actually have some data to back up and that we have a viable target path to dump the backup into. So we'll do backup handling in here, and then we will see about doing the backup stuff. Now, there is one thing that we need to keep in mind when doing this. We need to basically raise the events up here. However, there's one thing that we didn't account for when we created these events, and that is some kind of way to report back if some kind of error occurred, like for example the server level path doesn't exist, or we were unable to access the backup path, or whatever else could go wrong somewhere. In essence, the only real thing that we need to know is whether this backup was correctly completed, or if some kind of failure prevented it from actually running. Um, welcome back. We'll simply just add in another event that goes backup failed. So we can at least report if we are unable to perform this backup. So just like before, we'll add in an event handler for it. We need to report which instance this is. So of course we need to pass that. Get the actual event declared, and then the method to raising the event, which of course needs the server host ID. And here we need to invoke passing the server host ID. All right, so now we are also able to report if we can't perform this backup for whatever reason. What the reason is doesn't really matter, because it failed, so there's no backup. So whoever's running this application will then have to figure out exactly why it wasn't able to perform the backup. In any case, the failure event allows us to tell the main form to continue its process, or take some other action that the backup manager doesn't need to know about. So we'll leave it at that. All right. So here we shall add in a method that will be called perform backup. What this method will do is basically accept the backup entry, call this entry. We'll might as well use it since we're using it as part of the queue, and it will contain all of the data that we need. First part of it, we need to go through and check the source path, which is of course the server level path. We need to make sure that it actually exists. Before we start doing that, we will start by signaling that we are starting this backup process. The reason we do it here is because if, say for example, the server level path doesn't exist, or the folder is empty, then that constitutes a failure, which we can then report after we've started the actual backup process. This lets the main form hook into the actual start process of the backup process, so we can properly move through logically and know now it's begun, now it's stopped. Just adds a little better control doing it this way. If we suddenly just get a backup failure and expect a startup event, then it's going to be messy. So to begin with, we will signal that we are starting. And since we are getting the server host ID right here, we'll pass that. And down here, as part of the closing entry here, we will report it as failed. The reason for doing this is that we will have to go through a number of check steps, and if one of these check steps fails, then we only have one spot where we need to report it, and if all of the check steps check out correctly, and the actual backup process finishes correctly, then we can report a success and simply just return out of this method job done. Okay, so first of all, let's see if the original server level path actually exists. So for that we need to get the system IO namespace imported. If this particular path exists, which would be the server level path, then we can move on. If a non-existent path was specified, then we'll automatically get the failed event. All right, so what do we need to check to make sure that we actually have some stuff in here? Well, we should probably check that there are some folders in here. We should probably check that there are some files in here. In any case, these folders will always have at least one folder and at least one file. There is no way around that. The primary reason is that the level.dat file contains some binary information about, say, things like the world generation seed and a bunch of other things. And we will at least have an instance of dim1, which is the overworld, which is the primary world of the game itself. It will always be there. If that doesn't exist for some reason, because it might not have been generated, at least there will be a region folder. So at minimum one folder and at minimum one file will always be in here if the server has been started up at some point. And since this is a backup feature, we kind of expect that they should be in there. So we'll do a quick check to see if there are files and folders in there. So let's see. The directory dot the directory namespace allows us to get a list of directories as well as a list of files. So we can easily, by that, check out if we got at least one entry. Farlands, I believe it's part of a mod of some kind. I've heard it before, but I haven't actually played it. So I don't know too much about it. Oh, Sass is here. Hey, Sass. Good to see you. We don't exactly need to check which specific files and folders are in here, so we'll just grab a list and check that we actually have some. That's all we need. So folders, get the directories for the server level path. There we go. That's it. And then, oh, Jobon is here too. Hey, good to see you, mate. And files, exactly the same thing, get files. This is a quick and dirty way of simply ensuring that there's something in there. All right, so since we know that there is an absolute requirement of at least one folder and at least one file, all we need to check is to see if folders and files have a value greater than 0 for this to validate. So if folders.length greater than 0 and files.length greater than 0, then we should be good to continue adding up or continue our checks in terms of preparing for the actual backup stuff. Okay, interesting. um, All right. Um, anyway, um, right. We've checked that the source location exists and that it does have some um, files and folders in it. Next up, we need to check the target folder, which would be the backup path. So that's basically the same thing as the initial, except we check for a different folder. So let's see if the um, backup path exists. If it does, then we're happy. If it doesn't, then we might want to create it. So before we do this check, we will actually see if that path does not exist. So if it doesn't exist, then we will see if we can attempt to create it. And since this is file I/O, that's yet again another case where you should always try to catch your setup because file I/O can very easily fail. If we didn't try catch this to catch any potential errors, then the application could end up crashing. Um, nice. All right, so directory dot create directory and specify the backup path. There we go. Now, if does the backup path exist? Nope. Let's try to create it. If we come down here and basically end up right here, we check the backup path again. If for some reason the create directory failed, then we end up catching that failure, and that basically means that there's a very high chance that the backup path doesn't exist, which of course leads to a failure. All right, so if we're in here, that means the backup path exists and we've got data to back up. So next step would then of course be to start creating a zip file. But we kind of need to get a we kind of need to create a file name for the zip file, which should probably contain today's date and the time when this backup was started. And we probably also want to add in a prefix of some sort. Say we could use the three letters from the application, call it MSL dash and then the date and the time, and that should be more than enough. That way we are identifying that this zip was made by the Minecraft server launcher and the exact date and time it was started. So we'll grab the hour and minute from the current date time and stuff those in as part of the file name. In case that a file by that name already exists, we'll see if we can do some kind of incremental addition to it. Say do underscore 1, underscore 2, underscore 3, or something like that to find a backup file name that is not in use, and then attempt to do the backup from there. But once again, my bladder tells me that I need to respond to a nature call, so I will take a short break and we will be right back.